What's up, friends? Welcome back to the Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. It is time to talk about Elgton Jenkins and the big decision that the Packers are going to have with Elgton this upcoming offseason. Before we get there, quick news and notes from Wednesday. The big offensive tackle, Caleb Jones, is officially back and active on the Packers' 53-man roster. Remember, he had been put on the non-football injury list with mononucleosis. He had been sick and ill and has thankfully made his way back. They opened up his 3-week window to practice literally 3 weeks ago. Wednesday was the last day that they had to activate him. That does count as one of their 8 reactivations, even though it wasn't technically injured reserve. That does count as one of their 8 reactivations that they get throughout the course of the season. They did ultimately decide that they wanted to bring him back, and just kind of still a very fun story for this undrafted free agent, mammoth human being, 6'9", 300 and a bazillion pounds. Like you see him in person and you're just like, holy crap, that dude's just different. So we'll see what he can do the remainder of this year. He's on the 53. The Packers have obviously valued him enough to keep him on the roster. They've kept quite a few of these sort of redshirt players, including Caleb Jones, including Rasheed Walker, and a variety of others. They're basically their 7th round picks, maybe not quite including Samori Toure in that list, but Jonathan Ford, Tariq Carpenter, a lot of guys that haven't played, snaps on offense or defense, but they clearly have faith that they can develop those players and they can become something down the line, a la Yosh Nijman, who was an undrafted free agent, and they basically redshirted for a couple seasons, and that paid off huge for the Packers. They now have a starting offensive tackle because of it. So we'll see if Caleb Jones can follow a very similar Yosh Nijman-esque, path. Well, that's a tough thing to do. We've seen a lot of other players like Alex Light that have not been able to make that transition, but like I said, Caleb Jones just built a little bit different, and we'll see if he's able to make something of his career moving forward, but he is officially back on the 53-man roster. Will Elgton Jenkins be on the Packers 53-man roster in 2023? That is our topic for today. I think this is an interesting topic as we look forward into the future and we get into the offseason, but we're not exactly still on the bye week. We're starting to transition to Packers Rams. And as I mentioned, I'm not just going to do off-season discussions for the remainder of the season as the Packers get set to hopefully make a run at the end of this year. We'll see if that actually can come to fruition or not. But the reason I think this is still relevant is because a part of me does believe that the way Elgton Jenkins plays over these last 4 games could go at least a decent way in determining what the Packers want to potentially do with him this upcoming offseason. He's a very, very interesting discussion. I'm really excited to dig into it today because there's a lot of points here that I think are worth making. Now, on the surface, you might be thinking, Andy, this is Elgton Jenkins, 2nd round pick, was fantastic before he got hurt. Basically had a little blip in the radar when he came back and played right tackle. They moved him back to left guard. Now that he had some time under his belt, worked the rust off, got back to his position, and he's started to look really good again. This is a very good football player. You keep good football players. Like, that's NFL GM 101. You have a good player, keep good football player. That's the rule, right? So why would we even consider the fact that Elgton Jenkins could be gone? The Packers have, the money that they can spend. We'll talk more on that in just a moment, but they can find the money to re-sign him if they want. They could franchise tag him. They can do things to keep him on the roster. So why is this even a discussion with Elgton Jenkins? He's a good player. The Packers have ways to bring him back if they want. So clearly, if 1 + 1 = 2, he will be back, right? I don't think it's quite that easy, and here's why. Let's first of all, as I just said a second ago, the Packers can find the money to sign Elgton Jenkins if they want. That is 100% true, and I'll discuss why in just a moment, but it is worth noting here that the Packers salary cap next year is a bit of a mess. We're not going to go into all the minutia of it today, but I want to give you at least an overview. The upcoming salary cap in 2023 is expected to come somewhere between $220 million and $225 million. Let's just say that it's the $225 million mark, that it hits the high end of the salary cap. Now, per Ken Ingalls, who's sort of the resident, salary cap expert, on November 29th, he put out basically where the Packers salary cap is projected for 2023. With only 37 contracts, remember, you have 51 contracts that'll count against you in the offseason once you have those players on your books, and then 53 eventually, plus practice squad, injured reserve, etc. But with 37 players actually under contract, the Packers hit over that amount, over $225 million in salary cap space, with just 37 contracts on the books. So they are over the $225 million with just those 37 contracts, barely, but over it. If you add in signing players to future deals that are on the practice squad, which is usually, kind of a no-brainer, and then you also tendered Yosh Nijman as a second round restricted free agent tender, which also should be a no-brainer. Now they're about $17 million over the salary cap. If you add in what they're projected to spend in the draft, they're $20 million over. And if you count in the money that they need to operate through the course of the season, they're over $31 million over. Again, this is per Ken Ingles. Make sure to follow him on Twitter if you're not already. He does a fantastic job breaking down the salary cap and all the minutia with it. But just with those 37 contracts, the guys that are on the practice squad added on top of that, Yosh Nijman on a restricted free agent tender on top of that, adding in some slush fund for the course of the year, draft, etc. They're about, over 31 million over the cap and expected, how I would put it as available revenue and resources. So they need to clear, no matter what happens, they need to clear a ton of cap space. Part of that is going to be by releasing players, restructuring players, etc. There's a lot of salary cap magic that can be worked, as we've seen over the course of these past few seasons with Russ Ball, and it is fair to trust Russ Ball based on what he's done. Nothing he is doing is that out of the realm. All the teams are doing the exact same things that Russ Ball is doing, but they have the ability to get under the cap, clearly, and they will be able to find space to sign players that they want to eventually sign, specifically those that are on the team already. So that being said, they have a long way to go to just get to a place where they are actually breaking even from a salary cap standpoint, much less having money to spend. That's going to be very noteworthy in just a second. The other thing to note here is that Elgton Jenkins is not an exclusive rights free agent. He's not a restricted free agent. He is an unrestricted free agent. At least he's set to become an unrestricted free agent as soon as the new league year hits. So the Packers don't have any rights to him unless they were to use a transition tag or a franchise tag. The other thing that's worth noting here is that, and not that ESPN is canon for who's ultimately going to be the most sought after free agents in the world, but Elgton Jenkins is their third overall free agent, not third guard, not third offensive lineman, their third highest overall free agent that's set to enter free agency this upcoming season. So even if he's 5th or 10th or 12th, whatever that is, Elgton Jenkins is one of the top free agents in this upcoming free agent class and is set to get paid a massive amount of money by some team. Maybe that's the Packers, maybe it's not. That's why we're discussing this. So what are the options for Green Bay as Elgton Jenkins is set to hit unrestricted free agency? The first is that they can franchise tag him. They could try to pull a Davante Adams and franchise tag him, have him sign the 1-year deal, and then trade him. They could use the transition tag. They could let him, hit free agency and let him walk. Or they could try to sign him prior to the start of free agency. I suppose one other option would be he hits free agency and they just continue to negotiate with him and they continue to have dialogue and ultimately he signs back in Green Bay. But in reality, franchise tag, tag and trade, transition tag, free agency, or just sign him. Those are the 5 options. So let's go over those right now. So the first one I want to go over is the franchise tag and trade. This is probably a non-starter. We'll talk about the franchise tag more in just a moment, but let's say the Packers actually get to the point of franchise tagging him, right? With the thought of trading him. So they clear all the salary cap space that they need to in order to get under the cap to actually be able to franchise tag him. Now you've got to find a trade partner. And it's one thing to legitimately believe that another team is going to sign Elgton Jenkins to a massive contract. It's another to believe that they're going to sign him to a massive contract and give up a premium draft choice for him. And it would basically need to be a premium draft choice. The reason being is that if Elgton Jenkins walks in free agency, the Packers get a third-round compensatory pick for him because he's going to be one of the highest paid players in this free agency class. So they would be set to get a third-round pick in the compensatory formula for him in 2024. So if they were going to do a franchise and trade, they would at least need to get, you would think, a third-round pick in 2022 or 2023 to make it worth their while, right? Or you just let him walk and you take the third-round pick in 2024. Now, you could get a third-round pick in 2024 from a team, knowing that that'll be better than a compensatory pick. You could do things like that. I just don't think that some team is going to want to give up a top 100 draft choice and give him a massive contract that he's going to ultimately demand, whether he is franchise tagged and signed outright, etc. I don't think that this is a player that is going to demand both of those things. I could be wrong. It's maybe within the realm of possibility. If it did happen, I would say they probably get a third round pick in 2022 or 2023. Excuse me. I don't think they're going to do any better than that. And maybe that's still worth Green Bay's while because they get the third round pick in this year's draft rather than a compensatory pick in next year's draft. But you have to find the right dance partner to do that. And, ultimately what could end up happening is, you don't end up coming to terms or you have to rescind the franchise. Like, it just gets very, very messy. Or the other song and dance that you have to, sort of navigate here is there's always the chance that you could sign him to the franchise tag and then he just signs it and says, I'm going to play for 1 year and then I'm going to become a free agent next year. I'll play on your 1 year deal. And the reason that you have to worry about that, and why don't we just talk about the franchise tag and him playing on it right now, which was one of the other options, right? Is that if he signs that and just plays on it, the Packers are really screwed because they can't hold a $17.67 million cap hit. That's what it's expected to be, $17.67 million on a 1 year deal. They are in such salary cap craptastic space that they can't have Elgton Jenkins on a 1 year, $17.7 million deal next year and still have any hopes of competing. And they wouldn't have options, to spread that out. That is just a 1 year guaranteed $17.67 million deal that hits all of the salary cap in 2023. That is the cap hit. And again, you don't have a ton of options. So if you tag him with the thought that, hey, we'll tag him and then we'll trade him, and you tag him and he just signs it, now you are really potentially screwed in 2023 and have almost no flexibility with the remainder of your roster. So I do not believe, for a variety of reasons, that franchise and trade is going to be an option for the Packers. So let's cross that one out. So let's get back to just a franchise tag. So they offer him the franchise tag. They put him on a franchise tag with the intent of signing him to a long-term deal. Possible, certainly within the realm of possibility. As mentioned, 1 year, $17.67 million deal. The same thing applies where they would have some nervousness of he might just sign it and then they are screwed in 2023, and then he becomes a free agent in 2024. So you are crushing your team's salary cap in 2023 because you're holding this 1 year, $17.7 million cap hit on that year without the ability to spread it out. And then he becomes a free agent anyway in 2024. So you're kind of crippling your ability to compete in 2023 because you have this massive cap hit for one player. And in the meantime, now you're hurting yourself in the future as well because he just becomes a free agent in 2024. So you'd have to be fairly confident that he wouldn't just sign the 1 year deal, which maybe they have open dialogue with him and his agent and they say, we're not going to sign the franchise tag. That's not what we want to do. We want a long-term deal. He already has a torn ACL. We want that long-term deal. The issue there is that the moment that you sign him to that franchise tag or put the franchise tag on him, now his agent and Elgton Jenkins have all, basically of the leverage in the world with that contract because they know that Green Bay can't pay him the 1 year, $17.67 million and have any hopes of competing in 2023, whether that's Jordan Love or Aaron Rodgers or any form of this team. If they actually have thoughts of competing, they can't have a 1 year, $17.7 million cap hit. And if they think that highly of him, they're not going to want him to become a free agent in 2024. So his agent and Jenkins gain a ton of leverage the moment that they put the franchise tag on him. So while I think it's within the realm of possibility and keeping him off the market and working towards a long-term deal, there is some trepidation because he could just sign it and you are in no man's land, or he could sign it and again, you're giving him a lot of him and his agent a ton of leverage to work through and demand a long-term huge contract so that Green Bay doesn't have to pay that $17.7 million next year on the 2023 salary cap. So, towards a cap hit, towards the salary cap. So that I don't think is necessarily a great option either. That brings us to the transition tag. They could use the transition tag. What the transition tag does is it allows Green Bay to match any offers. This also just doesn't work. So they once again would have to clear the 16 million. It's about the expected transition tag. These are all per over the cap is 15.93 million. So 15.93 million that they would need to clear in salary cap space to put the transition tag on him. Once again, he could theoretically sign it, which would really hurt you with a 1-year, $16 million deal on next year's salary cap. So there's, again, some hesitation in doing that as well. The other issue is you are stopping nobody from signing him to a long-term deal. He's basically an unrestricted free agent at that point. You might say, Andy, but they'll have the opportunity to match the deal then. Okay, sure. Except every other team that's going to sign him to a free agent deal knows that Green Bay doesn't have year one salary cap flexibility. So every other team that has a ton of salary cap space is just going to sign him to a front loaded deal. And there's no way Green Bay is going to be able to match it. And Green Bay gets nothing in return. If they would still get the third round compensatory pick, but they don't get anything in return. It's basically just, I don't know. It doesn't do anything effectively because some team's just going to sign him to a front-loaded deal and Green Bay's not going to be able to match it. So it's you wasted all that time getting under the salary cap by $16 million to put a transition tag on him. That's basically just procedural anyway. No team that wants to sign him is even going to care about it whatsoever. So that's not a great option either. Of course, you could just let him hit unrestricted free agency and see if you can compete with other teams. Also a very bad idea because once again, some team could offer him a bunch of money up front, which is going to happen with signing bonuses anyway. So that's not a huge differentiator here. But other teams are just going to have more money than Green Bay. Chicago is a phenomenal example. They're going to need an offensive lineman. It would be very apropos if an NFC North team stole a very good player from Green Bay because that's just what happens every year. But they have a ton of salary cap space and a huge need along the offensive line. And not only would they be helping their team, but they'd be hurting the Packers. So it would be, he's familiar with Luke Getsy. It would just be a very smart signing for the Bears. And they have way more money to spend than Green Bay and could probably throw some incentives in there that Green Bay wouldn't be able to compete with. So if he hits the open market, some team is going to throw him a massive bag, could very well be the Chicago Bears, and Green Bay's just not going to be able to compete. So having him hit the open market, probably not the greatest idea either. The other option, the final option, is just sign him to a long-term deal. Whatever contract he wants, give it to him. Give him a huge deal. And that's within the realm of possibility as well. And I think this ultimately might be what happens, but there should be reason for pause and really trying to break down if this is actually a good thing for Green Bay. So signing him outright is, like I mentioned, within the realm of possibility, but you have to look at what you would potentially have to give in a long-term contract for Elgton Jenkins in this scenario. The other thing before we even get there that I wanted to mention was his agent might say, hey, it's great that you want to offer us this huge deal. And, we love Green Bay and we'd like to stay in Green Bay, but we know there's some teams like Chicago and, some other teams that have a ton of salary cap space and we'd at least like to talk to them. So we're very thankful that you're offering us this huge deal. We still kind of want to go out in free agency and sort of test the waters a little bit. No harm, no foul, but that's just what we'd prefer. So the only thing, if I'm Elgton Jenkins and his agent, I am saying I am getting to free agency. I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to sign me to a deal. There's at this point, with only 4 games left, there's not really any incentive for Elgton Jenkins to get a deal done right now. He only has 4 games left in the season. Get through those and you hit the free agent market. Unless, as mentioned, Green Bay puts the franchise tag on you, but you have a ton of leverage in that situation as well. So if they want to sign you to the franchise tag, so be it. If I'm the agent, I'm doing everything in my power to get to unrestricted free agency because I'm going to make more money if I can get him to unrestricted free agency. So, and if I'm the agent, I'm also threatening, if you put the franchise tag, I am signing the 1-year deal. You are not getting me on an extension, and you're going to have to pay me the whole franchise tag in 2023, and that's money that you don't have. So I would not call my bluff. I'm going to sign the 1-year franchise deal. Elton's still going to be super young in 2024, will be a top free agent in 2024. You're not going to double franchise tag him, so enjoy your 1-year huge salary cap hit, and we'll see you in free agency in 2024. So if I'm his agent, I'm playing hardball because he's going to get paid more if he hits free agency. So put that aside. Let's say Green Bay ultimately does find a place with his agent and Jenkins where they can actually get a deal done. What does that deal potentially look like? So I go back to Brandon Scherff. No, Brandon Scherff probably a little bit better of a guard. It's arguable. It doesn't even matter. They're close enough where we don't need to debate who's actually better of the two. Brandon Scherff was age 31 this season. He signed a 3-year, $49.5 million deal, $16.5 million per season. That was an older player in a lower salary cap. And we know the salary cap is set to explode in coming years, assuming that all things go according to plan. So you can expect that agents are going to want even more per season for an equal player. So he is younger than Scherff. The salary cap went up. It's set to go up even more in the coming years. If I'm his agent, I'm asking for more of a Joe Thuney deal of what Joe Thuney got in 2021. So this will be 2 years prior. So Joe Thuney in 2021 got a 5-year, $80 million deal. That is probably the minimum of what I'm looking for if I'm Elton Jenkins on a free market. And I think there's a legitimate chance he gets closer to 5 years, $90 million on the open market. If I'm his agent, that's what I'm asking for. If Thuney, same around age, I'd say Thuney is better. I think Thuney at that point was a better player than Jenkins. So we could have a little bit of a debate there, but this is 2 years later from when Thuney signed his deal. And as mentioned, the salary cap is set to explode, and every year deals get bigger and bigger. So if Thuney got 5 years, 80 in 2021, in 2023 for Elton, I want 5 years, 90. That's what I'm asking for. So if you're Green Bay, are you interested in a 5-year, $90 million deal for Elton Jenkins? And maybe the answer is yes. The first thing I should mention here with that 5-year, $90 million deal is that you would be able to front or backload the heck out of that deal if you signed it. Joe Thuney's cap hit in 2021, when he signed that 5-year, $80 million deal, that first year of his deal, $4.5 million. That's all it counted against the cap. So even if they sign him to a 5-year, $90 million deal, you're probably talking somewhere between $5 and $6 million that would actually go against the cap in 2023. You're borrowing a ton from the future. You're backloading the crap out of the deal, as the deals will be for the Packers for the foreseeable future. But he could, even in a massive deal, he could cost as little as $5 or $6 million against the cap next year, which is very team friendly, which is very workable for the Packers. So that part of it is all kosher. Like, you can make that work. You can easily fit that under their salary cap next year. You feel good about bringing your guy back. Everyone's overjoyed, right? You got Elton back, only $5 or $6 million under the cap. You still are signing him to a 5-year, $90 million deal. That is a lot of potatoes. So let's just look at whether or not that's a good idea. Here are Pro Football Focus's grade or rankings at guard for Elton Jenkins over the last 4 seasons. 21st in his rookie year. He was the 21st best guard. 24th in his second year. 11th last year. And 12th so far this year. Even in a down year, he's their 12th graded guard so far this year. So a very good starting guard. But not in any season so far in his career has he cracked the top 10 list of guards in the NFL. And guard is already a bit of an undervalued position. It's becoming more valued thanks to players like Aaron Donald, Chris Jones, etc. on the inside that can win with immediacy. So it's becoming more valued, but are you going to want to pay a guard who hasn't ever cracked the top 10 list of guards? And maybe they're just wrong. Maybe he's closer. Maybe some people would view him as a top 8 guard, maybe, 8th, 9th guard, whatever. But it's at least in the conversation of like, we're not talking about a upper echelon, all pro caliber guard. I know some people have this idea in their mind that Elton is like phenomenal and first team all pro capable. He hasn't shown that in 4 seasons. Even in his best year, he hasn't shown that he has been, you can argue that he's, probably like if there were a third team all pro, I'd say you could argue that he's getting close to like that third team all pro at times, but there are guards that are better than him in this league. And if you're going to make him the highest paid guard in football, that is, that's a decision. That's something you have to stop and pause and think about. That is a lot of money for a guard that has never been a premium player at his position. And one of the reasons that previously I said that I thought it was probably worth it was because he had shown the propensity to be left tackle, left guard, center, right guard, right tackle, play any of the positions at a moment's notice, and he could play well at any of the 5. That in and of itself was almost worth a 5-year, $90 million deal. Your right tackle's out, no worries. Elton can go play that. Your left tackle's out, no worries. Elton can go play that. Your center's out, no worries. Elton can go play that. And while I do think he still has the versatility to play left guard, center, and right guard if you need to, and really, there would never be a situation where you would need to move to a right guard, so it's basically center, left guard now. While I do think he still has some of that versatility, now there has to be very serious questions of if he can kick out to tackle, because he was awful at right tackle. Maybe some of that was working the rust off from his ACL injury. That's possible. Maybe it would be better if he moved to left tackle, which is playing his more natural side. But there's at least the question or the thought in your mind of like, do we even want to move him, and does he still have that versatility? And if not, now instead of paying a really good guard that has the versatility to play 5 positions, now you're paying a really good guard that is just a really good guard. And listen, I probably should have stated this at the onset. Like, clearly you want to keep really good players, as I kind of mentioned at the onset, but you want to keep players like Elton Jenkins. But at some point you have to decide, is your 5-year $90 million, in your finite resources and salary cap money, is that best spent on a really good but not great guard that no longer has maybe the versatility that he once did, that already has a torn ACL in his NFL career, and at a position that traditionally hasn't been valued quite as high as other positions? If I'm signing a player to a 5-year $80 million, 5-year $90 million deal, that better be a game-changing player that is going to completely change my offense, defense, whatever. I don't view Elton Jenkins as that player. I view him as a very good offensive lineman that helps you win football games. But I don't know that he is game-changing enough or good enough to command that type of salary. And if some other team is ready to give it to him, I almost am more leaning towards, okay, we can find a better way to spend $90 million over the next 5 seasons, and we'll pick up a 3rd-round compensatory pick, which they would get if he signed with another team, and we'll use that to the best of our ability to find offensive linemen like we do. Not in the 3rd round. By goodness, do everything you can to trade that compensatory 3rd-round pick to any other round. Do not pick in the 3rd round. We know how that goes. But they've found offensive linemen for years in day 3 of the draft. So, it's a really, really difficult decision. And the other thing that we need to discuss here is how much this is tied to what Green Bay does this offseason. How much is it tied to what Aaron Rodgers does? If Rodgers comes back and you want to make one more run at this, you're probably resigned to bringing back Bakhtiari and Jenkins and trying to do everything you can to keep that line together. If it's Jordan Love, maybe you feel a little bit more, towards, going in a different direction and going with more of a youth movement. If it's either of those guys and David Bakhtiari, they decide to move on from David Bakhtiari, that makes Elton that much more important, because do you really want to go into next year, whether it's Aaron or Jordan Love, without Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins? So the pieces around this with Bakhtiari and Rodgers could play a very major role in what Green Bay wants to do with Elton Jenkins as well. So I'll say it one more time. Elton Jenkins is a very good player. you want to keep very good players, and Green Bay has the ability to pay him top of market value if they want to do that, because they can backload it, and his first year is probably more of like a $5 to $6 million deal that they can easily fit under the salary cap. So the question becomes, how do you get there? Do you franchise tag him first with the hope that you can sign him to a long-term deal prior to him having to sign the one-year franchise deal, which would, again, really, really hurt you next year? Does the agent in Jenkins try to call the Packers bluff and say, hey, we're just going to sign the one-year deal? And that could, again, make things very hard for Green Bay. And are you able to get, even if you want to bring him back, are you able to get something done before the start of free agency? Because if he hits the open market, even if Green Bay is willing to do 5 years 90, there might be a team that's willing to do 5 years 100. And then it gets crazy, right? Then you have to just say, all right, you know what? We did what we could, but we just can't afford that. So I think this is a very difficult decision. One that on the at the forefront looks easy. Elgton Jenkins, really good player. We can make it work. Let's just make it work. I just think if you really look at it from a GM's point of view, this is a much harder decision than what it looks like on the surface. And I personally would lean towards not giving him that deal and letting him hit it big in the free agent market and starting to restock your offensive line through the draft, or hoping that guys like Sean Rhyan and Caleb Jones and Rasheed Walker and whomever else that they want to bring back next year can start making serious jumps, that Josh Myers and John Runyon Jr. and Zach Tom take legitimate jumps next year, and you start going in another direction, probably spending 3 more draft picks on offensive linemen next year. Not ideal, but we're in a situation with Green Bay where there's not going to be a lot of ideal when it comes to the off seasons, because Green Bay's put themselves in a situation where they're going to have to make some very difficult decisions. That's going to do it for me today. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, hey, subscribe if you haven't already. That'd be awesome. We're closer to 10,000. We're getting there. Tell your friends, tell your parents, tell your mom, tell your enemies, tell everyone that you love Pack-A-Day and that they should subscribe to it. That'd be awesome. I will see you guys right back here tomorrow. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.